Hey everyone, and welcome to the first video episode of A Mindful Perspective. I'm your host, Nick, and the reason that I'm saying the first video episode is because the podcast has been out for a little over a year now on Spotify and Apple. So if you're curious to know what types of topic that I'll be talking about on the channel, please feel free to look at the episodes that are already out. I've got a little over 50 episodes out now, so again, please feel free to check those out. But to kind of give a little summary of the types of content and types of topics that I'd love to talk about on the channel, it's really anything related to mindset, personal growth, self development, or anything just in the healing journey, right? Those are topics that are very dear to me, and I'll explain a bit more about my story very shortly here. But those are topics that I feel are so profound and just, again, very dear to my heart, right? So, and with that being said, that's why I wanted to start the first episode today with kind of sharing my story, okay? Because this is how I started the podcast initially, and I wanted to talk about how I got into the podcast. I got into my one-on-one coaching, my coaching practice with clients as well, and what kind of led me to this own self-development journey, or my own self-development journey, if you will, right? So, in order for me to do this, I want to share my story, right? And I think storytelling is so powerful. And I know for a fact that when someone shares their story with me and they allow themselves to be open and vulnerable, I truly appreciate that and I truly resonate with that as well, right? And my hope again is that what I'm sharing today can really resonate with people that are going through a similar path, a similar situation, in hopes that, if you are struggling right now, there is light at the end of the tunnel, right? And if you are struggling right now, it is completely okay to reach out and ask for help, right? That is a sign of strength, not of weakness. So, to start this off, I'm going to take us back about 8 or 9 years. I was 21 at the time. I'm currently 29. And basically, the best way I can explain it was that I was a prisoner of my own mind. Okay, so I had kind of these prison walls around me, and I was my own worst critic, and my own inner critic was extremely harsh, right? And something that I really resonated with once was I was watching an interview, and one of my favorite singers, Chester Bennington from Linkin Park, the lead singer, he was saying that basically, he was always talking about his mental health, which I was so happy to hear him talk about. But he was saying that up here was kind of like a bad neighborhood, right? And I truly resonated with that. And it's really how I felt at the time. And not only did I have trouble processing or dealing with what was up here, I also had trouble processing my emotions and dealing with my emotions, right? I wasn't sure how to deal with everything that was going on and how to process that. And I think as men, in our society, whether we learn that from, our family dynamic or from, society as a whole, at some point we've all heard the saying, men don't cry, men who show vulnerability are weak, and don't cry or you're weak or whatever, right? We've all heard these things before, right? And that couldn't be farther from the truth, right? I think a man stepping into his masculinity is so powerful, but I truly believe that a man stepping into both the femininity and the masculinity is what makes a man so powerful, right? Is to be able to balance both those energies. But I think that there's been kind of this shift in the world now where I think people are, or men more specifically, I'm saying, are more open to start being vulnerable, right? And, for me personally, at that point in time, I didn't really know how to deal with all of that, right? And I remember a point in time where, I was struggling so much that it was like I would wake up on Monday mornings and I would have trouble just thinking about the weekend, right? Like I'd wake up Monday and I would already be thinking about Saturday and Sundays because I was off that weekend and I had so much time and I didn't know what to do with my time, and I'd be afraid that I would be with myself, by myself again, and being very introverted by nature, I didn't really reach out to people a lot and all these different things. So I knew that I would be with myself and I was not my own best friend, right? My relationship with myself took me many years to build, right? It didn't happen overnight like any other relationship. And it took me a long time to actually be able to say, hey, like, I enjoy my company with myself, right? I enjoy sitting with myself now. I enjoy who I'm spending time with now, right? But kind of, again, talking about that, I was really stuck in, I think for a lot of us, what can happen is we numb ourselves, we distract ourselves, all these different things. And for me personally, that's exactly what I did, right? I didn't know how to deal with myself. I didn't know how to process anything. So I would smoke a lot of weed, play a lot of video games, mindlessly scroll on my phone, Netflix. I would even use the gym, right? Like the gym for me is my escape. It's how, I deal with everything. It's so good for my mental health. And I think exercise as a whole is very good for mental health. But, you know, being a gym fanatic and working out for the past 12 years, the gym at that point in time actually became a bypassing mechanism for me, right? It became a way for me to not deal with my stuff. So I'd be going to the gym like twice a day sometimes, right? Just to not have to feel, just to not have to deal with anything, right? Because again, feeling is painful, right? We don't want to do that. It's so painful. And sometimes what we do is we just push it down, right? We suppress it. We repress it sometimes. And basically we don't want to deal with the parts of us, in our shadow as an example, right? We don't want to bring those difficult parts of us to light because it's very painful, right? So for me personally, that's kind of where I was at the time, right? And I didn't know how to get out of that. I didn't know, I was always spiraling into negativity and being my own worst critic and very self-critical, very judgmental, oh my goodness, all these different things, right? I thought I wasn't worthy. I thought I was not enough. I was very, very harsh on myself. And, I pushed everything under the rug, right? And I didn't want to look at anything in the shadow, right? Didn't want to look at anything like that. That's why it was swept under the rug. So I remember, fast forward a little bit, I got into a relationship and I was like, okay, I'm happy now. I'm all good. Like all my issues went away, right? And obviously they didn't. What actually ended up happening was that I was projecting my own insecurities, my own stuff onto this person, right? And I wasn't happy at all, right? Like with myself, I wasn't happy with myself. And obviously that could not make a good relationship, right? So, fast forward a few years later, I buy my own house, we break up, right? I'm single, I'm in my house again, and now everything starts coming back up because I never dealt with anything in the first place. It was all, right? I was bypassing, I was numbing, I wasn't doing anything to address it. So how was I supposed to heal, right? And I remember, this is all part of my, dark night of the soul. And I remember, getting a call from my brother. So kind of a bit of backstory here, but my mother has been very sick for a very long time, like over 16 years. And, at that time she was, already going through her stuff, but then I was at the gym and I got a call from my brother and he was saying hey, we need to talk. Mom has stage 3 breast cancer. And I remember just that hitting me like a rock because I have a very good relationship with both my parents. I'm very close with both my parents, but my mom as well. And hearing that on top of everything she was already going through, on top of everything that I was already going through, it really hit me hard, right? I didn't know what to do. In fact, it didn't even set in. I was literally at the gym doing my workout. I get this call, I hear this news, and I was just shocked, right? And I was so shocked that I just continued my workout. I was like, okay. And then I finished my workout, and then I called my mom. And was like, is this true? What's going on? And then obviously we had the conversation. But I think a big shift for me was watching and just really taking a step back and looking at how my mom has handled everything in the past 15 years and now how she's handling cancer, right? She's been sick for such a long time and she's been doing everything that she could to work through this, right? To actually heal and such. And, I remember just watching her, right? She had so much resiliency. She was so resilient. She was so accepting of what was, right? And I remember talking to her at one point. I was like, how are you doing this? How are you so optimistic and not toxic positivity type of thing, right? Not bypassing, just being, oh, it is what it is, right? But she accepted the fact that there was nothing she could do, right? And that for me is where I kind of learned what acceptance truly was. For me personally is that it's not necessarily that you have to like or agree with the situation, right? And obviously in her case, she obviously didn't like or want that, but there's nothing she could do to change that. So she had to learn to accept that and live with it and deal with it as best she could. So a part of that is focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't control, right? And that's really what I learned from my mother. And I remember watching her through all of this. I was like, man, it sparked something in me. It's like, okay, I need to get myself out of this rut. I need help. I need to help myself, right? And I was still a bit hesitant to go to therapy. I was still, I went to therapy and coaching later on in my journey, but I was still a bit hesitant about that. And I was like, okay, what can I start doing? So I just went online and I started Googling and, how to work with negative thoughts. And then I started taking multiple personality tests and all these different things. The Myers-Briggs personality test, if anyone has ever taken them. I am INFJ if anyone is interested or cares to know. But so basically I went through this whole thing. And on top of that, I was like, okay, I was starting to get to know myself and all these different things. And at one point I remember developing all this self-awareness. I also became a bit self-critical, right? So self-awareness is the greatest skill we can develop, right? I truly believe that. But sometimes it can be a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes when we gather all this information about ourselves, we start to understand and know ourselves so well, and we start to get to know ourselves, sometimes we feel like, oh my goodness, like this is wrong with me. This is wrong with me. What is wrong with me, right? Like I am broken. I am a project that needs to be fixed, right? Like, but no, you're not. You are not a project. You don't need to be fixed, and you're not broken to begin with, right? There's nothing wrong with you is what I'm trying to say. And for a long time, I thought something was wrong with me, which is why I had trouble seeking out and asking for help, right? Because I thought that by asking for help, that person would feel like I'm broken or like see me as broken or like, wow, that guy is like very defective type of thing, right? And I knew that wasn't the case. And that's where, for me, I learned that curiosity, compassion, and kindness are really the keys when you're healing, right? In my personal healing journey anyways, and what I've seen through client work and just with talking with friends, right? I started understanding that I've got many layers, right? And my coach told me this once, and she's like, humans are like onions, right? We've got layers upon layers, and sometimes we dive into a layer and then there's another layer underneath. So that's why it's so important to approach yourself with curiosity, to approach your healing journey with curiosity, because when you start going into the depths of your shadow, right? And this is why shadow work is an example, right? When we're doing shadow work and uncovering and going into the unconscious, it's not easy work, right? Sometimes I feel like the word shadow work can be thrown around a little bit, but it's not easy work. It's not easy work to want to dive into the things that have been pushed away for so long. That's not easy work, right? So this is why I'm saying curiosity into all of this is so important, because you start to approach this with a sense of curiosity. So instead of attacking yourself all the time, what I did was like, okay, my inner critic's obviously very harsh here, but like, what is causing this, right? What story am I holding on to, right? Is this story even my own? All these different things. So I started diving into more of like this, this self-development, this self-work, and doing kind of more of this shadow work, if you will, looking at my shadow behaviors also. Why was I numbing myself? All these different things, right? So the video games and everything, sometimes that can be good in moderation, but for me, that was what I would consider my shadow behavior, right? Like I knew I shouldn't be doing that all the time and whatever, and it's not only that I was gaming, it was that I was using it as a mechanism to cope with stress or not deal with something, right? The same thing with how we all have our own coping mechanisms, as an example. So I started to get to know more about myself and more about myself. And, that's why I'm saying curiosity, compassion, and kindness, right? Because sometimes you find things that you're not ready to deal with, but you have to deal with it because you know that the work you're doing on yourself will also better your relationships in general. And the work that you're doing on yourself also ensures that you are not unconsciously bleeding on other people, that you're not projecting your own stuff on people that they don't deserve that, right? They don't deserve to be mistreated. They don't deserve to be whatever because of what is going on, right? And I'm a firm believer that at a certain point in life, it becomes our responsibility to heal, right? What happened in our childhood and, the traumas that we've had and such, obviously that's not our fault. Some people have had horrible hands dealt to them, right? And that's not our faults, right? And we have to understand that that's not our faults. But at a certain point, it does become our responsibility to heal because no one's coming to save us. And we do need to get on that healing train and help ourselves, right? Not only for other people, but for ourselves as well, right? Like honestly, to have that better quality of life. And then I think that once you start healing and, working on yourself, right? It's powerful, right? And it resonates with people around you as well. And one thing I've discovered on my healing journey as well is like, I found that this word enlightenment was kind of thrown around a lot, right? And it's like almost like people should achieve this peak of enlightenment where there's permanent happiness and such. And I personally don't agree with it, right? I think the healing journey is like, it's not linear. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like waves. It's like, it goes up and down. And even though you got good days, you'll have bad days, right? And even though you'll have good moments, you'll also have bad moments. But why would we even want to be enlightened, right? To me, I think that defeats the purpose of having human experience because all emotions deserve a seat at the table, right? I don't believe that there's such a thing as good or bad emotions, right? I think the minute you label something good, that means there's a polarity. That means there's something bad, and that's not the case, right? Sometimes we get shame, we get sadness, all for a purpose. They're trying to speak to us. Our body is trying to speak to us in a certain way, and we need to listen, right? So that's another thing that I truly learned on my own healing journey. But all that to say that, for me, I tried different things in my healing journey, right? I tried the coach. I had a therapist. I had a coach. I had reading was a big thing for me, right? Reading books, I think, was, one of the most powerful, life-changing things for me. And it still is, to be quite honest, right? And I think that reading, I will always remember, like, when I started reading, one of the first books I picked up was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And, I was sitting we're laying down in my living room at one point, and I will always remember I read a sentence from that book, and basically he was saying, rather than being your thoughts and emotions, be the awareness behind them, right? And to me, that completely changed my life because I understood at that point that I was not my thoughts and I was not my emotions. I was able to witness, I was the witness of my experience, right? If this is me, I'm able to kind of detach and simply just observe, right? Simply just observe and just be the witness of my experience and not get caught up in everything so much, right? And that, I say that, but that it took me a while to get to that point, right? It's just, I even though I read that, I was like, wow, it was a start for me, but again, it took more work to get into that. But again, even though I was anxious, right? Instead of saying, "Oh, I'm an anxious person," no, I am not anxiety itself. There's a part of me that's anxious, right? Even with my thoughts, as an example. Okay, the mind does its thing, right? The monkey mind does its thing. It jumps from one branch to the next, all these different things. But you are not your thoughts, right? Just because you have a lot of thoughts going in doesn't necessarily mean that you have to believe everything that you're thinking, right? It's not grounded in fact. It's not necessarily true, and most times it isn't, as an example. Okay, so another thing that I learned in my journey as I was going through this is really to try different things and try different modalities, right? So reading was a big one for me, and it's something that I work with clients, and I recommend books because I think books are so powerful, right? It's a gift that you get to read over and over, and it's just absolutely powerful, right? Another thing for me, another kind of healing modality, obviously was the coaching and therapy, right? I've done those, super helpful, by the way, obviously very helpful. And I think it's a part of the healing and grieving and all these different things is having someone else to share that story to, right? So whether that's in a group setting, like just some types of a group setting or anything like that, right? Like for me personally, I also tried a men's retreat, which was really cool, which was 18 men for a weekend, and we were talking about everything, right? Talking about our stories, our traumas, and processing that trauma and doing different things to deal with that, right? A very profound experience when you are kind of sitting in a room full of men that you can mirror, right? And they were all holding kind of that mirror that was reflecting upon yourself, which I found was a unique experience, right? So these are all different things that I've tried in my coaching, not my coaching, but in my own journey, right? But these are things that I bring in my coaching as in terms of like, I want my clients to do other things outside of the coaching as well, because the coaching session is great, but what you're doing outside of the coaching session, I think is equally, if not more important, as an example. Okay. So kind of fast forwarding a little bit, that this is how I got into coaching. I was like, wow, okay, I've kind of went through my own experience. I've done all these things, and now I'd like to help people going through similar things that I've been through to help them get from where they are right now to where they want to be, right? And that's how I kind of transitioned into the podcast and all these different things, right? So this is really a big part of why I wanted to share the story, right? Because for me, even though I felt so lost at a certain point in time, I was able to find light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes I know we're in this dark place and we feel like we can't get out, but I'm a firm believer that we can, right? I'm a firm believer that we can. We need to have that willingness. We need to have that drive to do so. But I think sometimes as well, as much as it sucks, sometimes we need to hit rock bottom in order for us to kind of climb back up, right? And like that saying goes, that cliche saying of like the phoenix rising from the ashes is an example, right? So I think that's a very powerful statement because it's very true. And that's what I've noticed for myself and other people as well, right? We get so sick of being the way that we are that there's nothing else that we can do but change, as an example, right? So I think that is something that I really learned, again, in my own journey. And something that I just wanted to end with, and this is a quote by Carl Jung, which, I absolutely love Carl Jung and all his work. And I actually got this, I love this so much that I got it tattooed on my arm. And basically what it says is, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And I think that is the most, if not one of the most powerful quotes that I've ever personally read, because it's so true, right? From my own subjective experience, as well as people that I've worked with, or just even people that I've talked to, friends that I've talked to, all these different things. I think, seeing people wanting to change, right? Because they don't want to let their past define them. They don't want to let their traumas define them and haunt their present and then impact their futures, as an example, right? And I think that those people, they want better for themselves, or they don't pass down the trauma to their kids. And again, that they're not unconsciously bleeding on other people, right? So that's what I'm saying. I've seen people where, I've heard stories from clients where it's like, it's unimaginable or it's mind blowing. And then they're like, I'm here, I'm ready to do the work, and I want better for myself. And I think that is so inspiring and so motivating, right? And again, it comes back to the storytelling. Hearing their stories inspires me so much, which is why, again, I wanted to share my story today, right? In hopes that it can inspire you if you are struggling, please know that you're not alone, and please know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out for help. Or if you don't know where to start, just start with something, right? Sometimes it's just, taking a walk, right, a few times a week. Exercise is so, so, so important for the body and mind, right? I think in our healing, the body and the mind, or the body and the mind, sorry, must be integrated, right? Both components need to be put together, right? They are equally as important, right? It's one thing to understand where the limiting beliefs and all these things are coming from as well, but it's also important to understand that your body keeps the score, right? I think we've all heard this term before. Your body keeps the score. The trauma, the unreleased energy is an example, right? Maybe the anger that we're keeping channeled in, depending on our childhood circumstances, our family dynamics, all these different things. But it's just to say that sometimes, even if you don't know where to start, just doing something can be very beneficial, right? Going for that walk, maybe going to a gym class, maybe going for a swimming lesson, moving your body, right? Maybe going for, as an example, a walk and grounding yourself in nature, right? Because especially, for me personally, like I know I'm better now, but I still dissociate sometimes. Like dissociation is a big thing for me, and it was before as well. And I know with dissociation, sometimes you feel cut off from your body, right? So it's important to get that energy back into your legs, right? So like even like movement, right? Body squats, or going to the gym and doing legs, going outside in nature, walking on grass, right? Like grounding yourself and all these different things, but bringing the sensation back to your legs is a big part of how you can help with that dissociation, right? So just an example here, but again, I genuinely hope that this story can help you if you're in a time where you feel like you're kind of lost and you're in that dark place. I'm rooting for you personally, and I know you can get through this. And with that being said, that's really what I wanted to share in this episode today. And then basically next week, typically I do episodes every week. And then next week I will continue the podcast as I typically do. But I really wanted to kind of talk about this again and address this again. So again, if you've listened to this so far all the way, thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.